In an underground arena, people from high society converge to watch and bet on various monsters called players as they battle to the death. One night the supposedly unintelligent creatures suddenly gained wills of their own and then began a revolt which led to the death of every human present except for two. In the chaos, a doctor called Kanzaki runs away with a newborn child. In the present, we see two couples strolling while discussing this serial killer uproar in town. Just then a strange man walks past them and kills the man so discreetly that no one noticed it happening. In the outskirts, an old man stops his grandson rushing out and hands him his toy. The boy is our main protagonist called Jin. He rejects the toy, but his grandfather wants him to hold on to it when out on patrol in the name of justice. Before he leaves, he is urged to avoid violence if it's not for the sake of justice. In an alley, some thugs have a lady cornered, so Jin proposes to help her if she is willing to pay 1,000 yen. When she agrees, Jin immediately begins attacking the thugs. He easily takes one down, making the others furious. Jin's fighting style involves him maneuvering on the walls to avoid being cornered. In a short while he finished handling the group, his patrol mates called Kuga and Konoha arrive to find the party over as Cougar scolds Jin. The lady comes to show her gratitude, but Kuga doesn't let Jin take his reward from her. Later the lady bumps into Jin and offers him his 1,000 yen reward as promise. She also gives him her card and promises to treat him if he ever visits her. Jin runs home in excitement only to find dead bodies around the vicinity. He locates his grandfather, who was on the verge of death. As he is a young child, he hasn't grasped the situation yet. He tries to apply saliva hoping it would heal the wounds just as he was told, but it doesn't work. Jin takes his grandfather's body to the doctors, but he is turned down as he doesn't have enough money with nowhere else to turn to. He calls Kuga. Unfortunately, his father had just discovered he had been hanging around a homeless boy and he has been scolded for it. The maid brings forward Kuga's ringing phone, but when his father finds out audits from Jin, he destroys the phone. Jin turns to the lady who he helped earlier and together they go to a hospital. Later she takes Jin in for the night since he has no one else to turn to while they have their bath. Jin adds up all the information together and begins crying because he can't meet his grandfather anymore. While heading to shop, they are attacked and the lady, whose name is Acme, is injured. All trying to protect Acme, the serial killer reveals he was the one that killed his grandfather. Jin is beaten up badly, and when Acme tries to help, she gets blown away by the enemy's tongue. The enemy morphs into his true monster form and moves to give the finishing blow. However, he is caught in his steps and knocked down by Jin. Jin begins letting out an intense aura that destroys the surrounding. As he moves to attack, he too transforms into a monster that the serial killer calls Charisma. He lands an attack which puts an end to the brief battle. He then turns back into his human form and collapses. A man called Hitani and a white-cladded individual show up in the scene. The clad individual takes care of the defeated monster while he ignores Jin and Acme, who he thinks are humans. During her usual humanitarian activities, a grown-up Kano has attention is drawn to two men fighting. It is explained to her that although the cause of the fight was because Duke spilled Toku's meal, the men are simply letting out their frustration on each other. She goes to separate them but is pushed aside easily. The men look to continue the brawl even with her on the way, but Jin appears and calms the situation. Panahar recognizes the ring on Jin's hands and calls out to him, but their supposed reunion is cut short by the man who Jin works as their bodyguard in town. Jin meets up with Acme, who now struggles to survive thanks to the injuries from the sad battle. In the evening, Konoha attends Kuga's event where she meets her grandfather, whose presence greatly disorients her. After the event, Kuga reveals he plans to start patrolling the street again like they used to. A truck driven by his friends arrives and so they begin their street patrol. Meanwhile, Jin is captured by the Aragi family and forced to witness the death of Acme at the hands of a monster. This triggers his transformation into the monster the men calls E.T. While the men observe, the monster pounces on Jin, who doesn't retaliate, but at the same time he seems not to take any damage at all. When he gets serious, he ends the monster in a blow to the surprise of his observers. He goes ahead to smash the observation glass, but before he can confront the enemies, he hears Acme call to him. On seeing her, his body's transformation begins deteriorating. The men reveal that Jin can only be turned back to human when he kills the monsters, who are called players. Jin finds out Acme has been turned into a player, but all he wants is to live a normal life with her again. Just then an employee shoots Acme dead, so Jin witnesses her die a second time when he goes to confront The man he turns back into a human as there are no more players alive at home. Kuga watches an anime that inspires his sense of justice. When Konoha comes in, he expresses his dissatisfaction with their father's activities. However, Konoha reminds him that real life cannot be perfect like an anime show. Kano, his grandfather Mitsu, introduces himself to a sedated Jin and reveals he hopes to eradicate the players from the city. They arrive at the destroyed underground facility where Mitsugai explains that the ring on Jin's hand and the one above are called the Rings of Exposure. As founders of the facility, he explains that they once used the ring to force players to regress into their monster form. During the conversation, Jin suddenly collapses. He begins screaming in pain as the bigger ring resonates with his own. Later, Mitsugai explains that he and Kanzaki created him as a countermeasure against the monsters who they had battled each other. He then takes Jin to town where he shows him Make Me is still alive, and what he saw in the lab was all artificially created. When Jin tries to go out, Mitsubai instructs him to disassociate with humans as it would only endanger them. Jim accepts to become Zet and help Mitsugai battle the players on the condition that they repair Acne's face and also create a look-alike of her dead child in an alley. A man is melted into sand by a group of players. A girl happens to catch them in the act, so they decide to handle her as she runs away. One of the players chases after her. Meanwhile, Jin continues to collaborate with Mitsugai while they perform experiments to promote his Z factor to full capacity. Jin arrives at his house, and while changing he finds the lady being chased earlier hiding in his closet. He tries to chase her away, but she refuses to leave, revealing that she just saw a man melt into sand. Jin ends up treating her to a home-cooked meal, which she appreciates. He senses the presence of a player, so he instructs her to stay behind while he heads outside. The girl comes out to find her bag laying on the floor, and shortly after she is accosted by the players from earlier. Jin arrives at the scene and offers to help her for a fee of 10,000 yen. When she accepts, one of the enemies approaches him, so he knocks him down first. While engaging the others, they spread a substance that erodes anything it makes contact with. While they continue to battle, the men monitoring Jin knock out the lady being held hostage. Just then one of the players regresses into his monster form. Before the battle begins, the other two players desert their brother who broke the rules. By regressing, Jin begins battling the player in his human form, and as a result he is eaten by the monster, who boasts of a strong build. The monster firmly grabs Jin and begins the process of melting him into sand. However, Jin gets a boost of power and pushes him back. He transforms into Zet and overpowers the monster, defeating it by ripping it apart. Mitsugai notices he isn't returning to his human form as he should, and this is because the player isn't dead. While it hides in its miniature form, the white-clad individual known as the Sweeper finds him out and executes him. As he does to all regressed players, the Sweeper attempts to kill Jin, but then he stops when Jin doesn't give the feeling of a human. Or player Haitani arrives and dismisses the Sweeper. Jin asks if he is a player, so he reveals he and his species prefer to be called Ebel. The next day in Jin's house, the girl introduces herself as Hanoka and begins arguing with Jin when he tells her to leave the next day. Elsewhere, Kuga is shown to a secret facility where some of his father's aides have secretly built a superhuman suit to encourage his ambition. Fuga begins by stating the flaws of the suit, which is meant to be identical to his anime hero Alphys. He complains about its color and also asks why there is no emblem on the head. On his way home, he encounters a man who refuses to identify himself. The man reveals he is a fan of Kuba's and proposes to work with him if he passes a test. He then shows him a clip of Hanako being thrown into a pool to drown. He explains that Kuba is faced with two choices: to either save his drowning sister or three strangers who are about to be killed. Kuga rushes to the school to find his sister in no harm, and as a result of his choice, three girls from his school are killed. While walking with Hanako, Jin stumbles on Konoha, and her friend Hanako notices the chemistry between them and hangs on to Jin's arm. Jin tells Konoha to get away from the premises and immediately walks away. As they walk away, Jin senses the presence of a player, so he leaves Hanako behind. He hurries to find that Konoha has been abducted by a player who wants to battle him. Konoha finds herself and her friend tied while a monster guards them. While Kuba is shown the newly completed alpha, she manages to call him for help before her phone is smashed by her captors. Cougar quickly suits up and has nothing standing in the way of his justice while he goes to Kano, his aide. Meanwhile, Jin gets the beating of his life as he is incapable of transforming into Zetshu. The player assigned to Konoha transforms in front of Konoha, making her so scared she wets herself with a ZT factor, increasing slowly. Jin manages to land a fatal blow on the enemy player. Jin begins his search for Konoha and finds her in Tomomi rather easily. While saving the girls, he gets stabbed from behind by Shu. In his clones he goes to confront them and so the battle begins. However, Jin is overpowered yet again. Before he is finished off, Kuga defeats the monster from above with a laser. Kuga quickly helps Konoha and Tomomi into his chopper, but then he is told its capacity cannot handle everyone present. Kuga decides to stay behind, but they won't have it as he is the heir of the Amaji family. To test his decision-making skill, Hayami asks what he'll do if he has a rift that can save one person but 3 people are drowning. If he decides to save all 3, they might not survive. The question makes Kuga hesitate, but a small push from Jin firms his resolve, so he lets Tomomi take his place on the chopper. While Jin finds his way around injured, he stumbles on the slum folks who he used to stand up for. They look ready to fight for him, but Jin begs them to run away as the enemies are monsters. They don't listen anyways and go face to face with the monsters. Before they are attacked, Kuga saves them. He buys them time to escape. While he handles the shrimp monster's hit on, he finds Jin useless, so he decides to educate him on how to transform without having to take damage. First he stabs him with a stake made from the remains of exposure ring, and so the ring fuses with Jin in seconds. Jin begins transforming into Z. However, he doesn't stop at a white CET, he continues evolving until he emerges as a more powerful red CET. Jin is astonished by his new form and doesn't feel like the body belongs to him anymore. At the same time, the head player is shot by Cuban midair. It gets furious and transforms into a full-blown monster. When it boasts of its durable form, Kuga switches weapons to a blade as Shu moves to escape. Jin catches up with him. Shu suddenly begins regressing as a result of his resonance with Jin's ring. Jin engages Shu where he dominates him with every strike before he finishes him off. Hatatani shows up to interfere. He reveals he used Shu as a pawn to push Jin to his red form. This infuriates Shu, but Jin puts an end to his life. He continues squashing his offspring until all traces of him die for good. Jin confronts Hatatani, asking for his motive, so he reveals the ring won't make him regress as he is a high-level EVOL. Jin moves to attack him, but he evades his every move before leaving the scene. Meanwhile, over at Kuga's battle, he is getting bodied by the player. When he gets the news of Kano his safety, his will to fight is restored fully. The player's attack is cut short by Jin, who lands a hit from behind. The two friends team up to fight the player who has made an army of hatchlings. They battle the hatchlings together and manage to corner the player in a 2v1 situation. However, Jin's body suddenly stops moving, allowing the hatchlings to join in the fight again. The stake on his chest breaks, so his red transformation comes undone. He reveals to the player that he is being used by Hatatani, but he doesn't care as long as he can kill. Just then Kuga grabs him from behind, allowing Jin to retrieve his sword. The new partners corporate, and while Kuga keeps the hatchlings at bay, Jin finishes off the player without any interruption. Later, Hatatani meets up with the boss of the evils. Although he is scolded for meddling with other players' affairs, Hatatani changes the direction of the conversation when he mentions Zet at the hospital. Kuga meets up with Jin after hearing the entire story behind the players in Jin's form. He is so fascinated by Zet that he gives Jin a hero named ZTMAN. At the lab, it is revealed to Jin that Kanzaki is still alive. They make Jan ask him about the correct method of attaining the red Z transformation, but Jin just wants to see his grandfather. They go to the location where Kanzaki is being held, and when it is open, Jin is shocked at his horrible state. Kanzaki's brain was revived to obtain information from it, but it became conscious with the will of its own. Thus, he is being kept in a state of preservation. After Kanzaki reveals that the secret to his transformation is the redstone, Jin unplugs his life support so he can rest in peace. Katani leads his spy into the Aragi mansion to obtain the pendant with the red stone. The spy goes into Konoha's room looking identical to Jin. He forcefully moves to get the pendant from her neck, but it's not there. Just before she hands it to him, a helicopter arrives in front of the house. Jin and company rush into the house, and so it is revealed that there are 2 of Jin's clones present. Kuga immediately moves to go check on Konoha, but he is attacked. He manages to evade them, and when he is pursued, while Jin helps out the other clone targets Mitsugai, but his scientist takes the blade for him. Before he is killed, Jin arrives to save him. It soon becomes a two-way battle, but when one of the clones' forms begins to deteriorate, Jin ends him easily. Outside, the enemy had successfully obtained the pendant, so the mansion rigged with bombs is caused to explode. Later, Jin stumbles on the boss in town. He reveals he was the first player to turn on the humans. Jin becomes hostile, but the sweeper arrives to keep him in check. The boss explains that Hatatani is both an enemy to humans and evils, while The majority of the evils want to coexist. Hitani seeks to destroy humans, and so he wants Jin to assist in taking care of him. Jin goes home to find Hanako waiting for him. She begs him to let her stay, as she only feels safe with him. Jin then promises to protect her no matter what happens. Kuga meets up with Jiru, because he was told that his sister has been captured. When he asks about Konoha's whereabouts in the car, Kuba is dropped. He awakens in a strange room with Jiru talking from an implanted earpiece. Jiru reveals he is about to start his test and mocks him for being easily deceived and kidnapped. Despite playing hero with his guard up, Cougar moves around until he finds himself in a room filled with his schoolmates who are also fans of his. Jiru explains that he has the choice to either find him so he can save his sister or prioritize the student's safety. This pushes him into a state of anxiety, so when a rude girl asks for his autograph, he begs to use the restroom. When returning, he encounters a girl who claims she found the building suspicious and wants to escape with him. She presses on the wall, which in turn reveals a secret room where the girls are. Cougar leaves the girl to find a route alone while he joins the other girls in the hall. When a student jumps on the bed, she tells Kuga he has made the wrong choice, and immediately she is crushed to death on the bed. This freaks everyone out, and he even gets blamed for her death. The students fled into the passageway despite Cougar's disapproval, and so they get trapped. As a result, Jiru unleashes Hammerman and reveals there is an elevator that will lead Kuga to him, but he has to abandon the girls. Cougar refuses and moves to defeat the robot so he can advance with everyone while Konoha hides in Acne's house. She tells her she doesn't believe Jin found his parents as he wrote in a letter. Suddenly the town's broadcast is shut off and hijacked by Hitani. He reveals the existence of evils in there origin. Just then, evils begin to regress all over town. They go on a killing spree, massacring any human they can find. Kuga continues to face Hammerhead while being pushed to his limits in town. Jin joins the fight to save the humans as White Setman. Despite his injuries, Kuga can only feel excited about the battle. However, he soon finds that Hammerhead is a player. He charges at it again, and when he loses his sword, he jumps and turns it into a gun, which he fires at point-blank range on the player. After the battle, the girls brand him a murderer and want nothing to do with him. When the elevator is revealed, they all run toward it, but then lasers pop out of the wall and kill them all. While in despair, the last surviving student brings hope to him. She is controlled to tell Cougar she found Konoha, but he doesn't know this. She leads him to Jiru's location and manages to distract and dispossess him of his weapon. Jiru introduces Kuga to his son called Akuru, and here they both begin lecturing him about his motive for justice. Jiru hits the nail on the head when he reveals that Kuga seeks justice as an excuse to engage in violence. Jiru begins transforming, so Akaru reveals his true monster form. They claim to be humans who granted themselves player abilities after the incident at the underground arena. Just then, Kuga's friend Hayami reveals himself to be an accomplice to the players. He makes Kuga watch a live press conference where his father denies creating the players. However, his colleague, who works for Hayami, reveals the brutal truth to the public with evidence. While Jiru wants Kuga dead, Hayami wants him to be a hero and kill his father. This angers him, so he gets his weapon back, strikes Hayami and ends Akiru and Jiru before they can control him with their buck. Hayami and the fellow EVOL show up at the press conference, but President Amaji is ready for them. However, his plans fall short as they are too strong to be handled by mere humans. Jin arrives at the scene to handle, but he gets extremely bodied by him. He pierces Jin directly in his heart and undoes his transformation. Kitani reveals he has made the red stone into a stake to force Jin into a proper player. Just then, Cougar arrives in his alpha suit to stop him. He even handles the second player in a blink of an eye. Puba's father instructs him to kill Jin, but he refuses and turns his gun to him. Instead, he pulls her trigger and hits his mother, who stepped in to shield her husband. Just then, Haytani unleashes an army of players in the room and begins mass slaughtering everyone present. Kuga begins defending the civilians against the players, but after a while the action comes to a halt with Kano has arrival. Adani pressures Jin into stabbing himself by revealing Hanako as a hostage. Despite Kuga's disapproval, he stabs himself and transforms into the Red Zetman. His ring of exposure causes all players, including Hitani and Hanako, to regress into their true form. Hanako transforms into a giant four-legged monster and is revealed to be the player who turns everything into sand while blabbing about his master plan. Jin dashes at Haitani but is pushed back by his halos, and Akeo continues to move uncontrollably and turns humans to sand unintentionally. Jin manages to pull a fast one on Haitani and stabs him, but Kuga moves to put Hinako down. He slashes her into two while Jin watches, eventually bringing him to despair too, but engages Haitani in a fruitless battle. While Konoha and the detective watch, Haitani's attack damages Kuga's suit, so he crashes down. He is warned to stop fighting, but Kuga refuses to back down. Haitani pins him down and offers to let Jin give the finishing blow. However, Jin turns his attack on Haitani and stabs him instead. Kuga turns his blade on Jin, saying he has to kill him to stop players from regressing. When it's time to pull the trigger, he hesitates, but still does it. While the sun rises, Jin stops him and transforms into a stronger version of Zet. Called Charisma, he manages to control his killer instinct and leaves the scene. Years later, Kuga continues to protect innocent people from regressed player attacks, and at the same time, while being unnoticed by the public, Jin does the same in his red Zet form. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and want to see more, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss a future video. And until next time guys, take care.